In 1628, the Dutch East India Company launched its flagship, the Batavia, a three-masted merchant vessel built in Amsterdam. The most powerful commercial organization in the world was sending its finest ship on its maiden voyage to the East Indies, loaded with silver, gold, jewels, and 325 people. The ship never arrived, but that is not the story. The story is what happened before the ship sank, and what one man did in the months after. On a tiny island off the coast of Western Australia, far from any port, far from any authority, far from anyone who could stop him. By the time it was over, 125 people were dead, murdered, by the man the commander had left in charge. The wreck of the Batavia is not a story about the sea. It is a story about what human beings do when they believe nobody is watching. The plan was already in motion before the ship left port. Among the 330 people aboard the Batavia was Jeronimus Cornelisz, a 30-year-old former apothecary and bankrupt merchant who had signed on with the VOC to escape persecution for his association with a heretical painter. He was the ship's under-merchant. He was also already plotting. During the voyage, Cornelis conspired with the ship's skipper Arian Jacobs and other officers to mutiny, seize the Batavia and its cargo, and use the ship for piracy. The plan was audacious. Kill the commander, take the ship, disappear, live as pirates. The Batavia was separated from the rest of the fleet in a storm off the Cape of Good Hope. Now it was alone on the Indian Ocean. The conditions were right. Jacobs allegedly had his men sexually assault a wealthy female passenger, Lucretia Jans, who was traveling to join her husband in Batavia. The plan was to provoke the commander into disciplining the entire crew, creating the uprising needed to justify the mutiny. But Lucretia was unable to identify her attackers. The incident was dropped. The mutiny never happened. Not because the plan collapsed, because the ship did first. In the small hours of the 4th of June 1629, the Batavia smashed into morning. Reefed just off the Houtman Abrolhos, an island chain 60 kilometers west of what is now Geraldton in Western Australia, sailors traditionally viewed shipwreck as a death sentence. Few could swim. Because it was night, no one knew they were near the relative safety of an island. Approximately 300 of the Batavia's 341 passengers and crew made it ashore. The rest drowned in the attempt. They reached a small, flat island. No shelter, no food, no fresh water. Nothing but coral and sky. Even today, the Abrolhos Islands are very isolated. 400 years ago, their remoteness must have seemed lunar. Commander Francisco Pelsaert faced a decision. The survivors were dying. There was no water on the island. He took a small group and sailed north in the ship's longboat. His destination was Batavia, the colonial capital in what is now Java, over 3,000 kilometers away. He would find help. He would return. He left Cornelis in charge. This was the worst decision Francisco Pelsaert ever made. Cornelis remained on the wreck of the Batavia, only abandoning it when the ship finally sank under him 9 days after it struck the reef. He came ashore with nothing. No ship, no plan for piracy. The rescue ship, if one came, would eventually arrive. That was the only vessel available now. That would have to be enough. Cornelis formed a select band of men and devised a new plan. They would reduce the number of survivors to 40. Then they would seize the rescue ship when it arrived. Then they would carry out the original plan of piracy. To reduce the survivors to 40, he needed to eliminate roughly 200 people. He started systematically. Those who might oppose the mutineers were sent to islands further away in small boats and told to look for water. They were not expected to find any. Cornelis believed they would simply perish. With the potential resistance removed, what followed was a reign of terror. Over the next several months, Cornelis and his men raped and murdered at least 125 captive shipwrecked passengers and crew. Men, women, children, infants. Anyone who could not be controlled was killed. Anyone who might resist was killed. Some were strangled. Some drowned. Some were simply executed on the beach. Cornelis took Lucretia Jans, the same woman his men had assaulted on the voyage, as his private captive. The island had become a killing ground, and nobody was coming, except the men Cornelis had sent away to die. The men sent to the nearby Wallaby Island unexpectedly found fresh water. Led by a mercenary soldier called Weeb Hayes, they survived. One man managed to escape from Beacon Island and swam across to warn them of the massacre taking place. Hayes had approximately 20 soldiers. They had been disarmed before being sent away. They found food in the form of tamer wallabies, the first marsupials ever encountered by Europeans. They built weapons from what they had. They built stone fortifications. Cornelis sent men in boats twice to attack Hayes and his group. Both attacks were repulsed. 2 attacks by armed mutineers, both defeated by unarmed soldiers who had been left to die on a dry island and instead found water, found food, found the will to resist, and built the oldest European structures ever recorded on Australian soil. The third attack was already being launched when the horizon changed. In October 1629, at the height of their last and deadliest battle, they were interrupted by the return of Pelsert aboard the rescue vessel Sardam. Hayes reached the ship first. He told Pelsert everything. Cornelis' men paddled toward the rescue ship immediately, but they were too late. Pelsert had already heard the full account. Cornelis' men surrendered when Pelsert threatened to sink their boats. What followed was justice of the 17th century variety. Cornelis and the ringleaders were tried, had their hands severed, and were executed by hanging. The trials were conducted on the islands themselves. The evidence was overwhelming. Bodies were still in the ground. 2 of the youngest mutineers were considered too young to execute, but too dangerous to bring back to society. Wouter Loos and Jan Pelgrim de Bay were sentenced to be marooned on the Australian mainland. No further contact with them was ever recorded. They became the first known European residents of Australia. Their fate is unknown. Of the 322 people who boarded the Batavia when it sailed, only 116 made it to the port of Batavia. The wreck itself sat undisturbed on Morning Reef for over 300 years. Subscribe if the ocean's history is worth following. The next story goes deeper.